Okay, this is piece 117, The Horse in Motion by Edward Muybridge. It's made in 1878 out of an albumen print. The context for this is that Governor of California, Leland Stanford, for whom Stanford University is named, had a bet about the horse's motions functions, and he hired Edward Muybridge to kind of settle the bet. And the ideas floating around were that number one, did all four of the horse's hooves leave the ground at once ever in the galloping stride? And if they did, people thought that they would have left the ground when the horse's front legs were completely extended right here and the back legs were completely extended. Edward Muybridge was hired by Stanford to figure this out because Edward Muybridge, since he was a young man, was an inventor, an experimenter, a photographer. He was a jack of all trades. But here you can see he's got a self-portrait in front of this giant redwood. Some of his photographs were used in books about the beautiful sights of California. He is featured here with this all white beard and hair because when he was in a stagecoach accident, he was thrown from the stagecoach, head hit some hard rock, we think, and from that point on, it kind of ruined his or changed his personality. He lost his sense of smell and sense of taste, and his hair turned white in a matter of 3 days. And from that point on, he became a bit more eccentric and a bit more of an artist. So still capable of doing great experiments. Thus, he would still be hired by Stanford to do this experiment. And here's the experiment. It took place at Palo Alto Racetrack in California. Against this wall, Muybridge set up this huge white backdrop on which he'd written numbers. And across from the backdrop, he had this kind of little house shed affair in which he had 12 cameras. You can see there are a lot more than 12 cameras in this one because he redid the experiment in 1879 with 24 cameras. But for this one that we have, there were 12. And the idea was that as the horse was racing down the track, he would trigger, or she, it was a mare, she would trigger or hit these little strings that would trigger the cameras. So here is the picture of the cameras that were used. And the horse would pull a string that would mechanize this or engage this pull. It would pull down this piece of wood, show the shutter, and then the top piece of wood would come down very quickly, like, with thousandths of a second. Muybridge tested it with a horse that was not in full gallop just to see if it worked. And the form that he used was this albumen print. It's created with egg whites. That's what albumen is. And there are other chemicals here, salt, silver nitrate, sodium, and selenium. And the basic idea, though, is that this albumen print is a print of a negative that's taken with a camera. And so you can make many of them. And Muybridge describes at the bottom of this piece of art, the negatives of these photographs were made at intervals of 27th inches of distance and about 20/50th part of a second of time. So he describes this and he says at the end, they are absolutely untouched. The plan, because this was a significant bet, I don't know how much money was on the line, but the plan was for Muybridge to take the pictures there at the racetrack and then process them at the racetrack also, so that it could be proved that they had not left the grounds and been meddled with in any way. So he did that at the racetrack and created this image. And you can see it's a freeze frame. It's got corresponding numbers for each image, 1 through 12, and it's placed in a grid pattern. And then in terms of content, it does show the movement of a horse, including, you can see in grid 2 and grid 3, the fact that all 4 horses' hooves do leave the ground at one time, but it's not when they're fully extended, it's when all 4 legs are underneath the body of the horse. Muybridge, because this was such a success, ended up continuing this whole concept with showing people in motion and people in motion with a goat. He did lots and lots of different motion examples or motion, almost videos, we could call them. So the function is that he proved that horses' feet are off the ground all at once. He presented these images in a grid fashion or a grid format, and the ultimate result of this function is that people like Andy Warhol did art that was in this same grid format. This is Marilyn Monroe. This is not our diptych Marilyn Monroe piece that we have in our set, but this is pretty cool. And then because he was illustrating motion in a very detailed way, later artists, like in this case, Marcel Duchamp, who's going to create the fountain that's in our set, he did this piece called Nude Descending the Staircase, or A Staircase. And he shows, although it's cubism, he is trying to show the movement of legs of a woman who is descending a staircase. And then finally, the function of this is that Muybridge begins the movies for us. He showed us that people have what's called persistence of vision, where they have a little image placed in their brain and they hold it in their brain. And a movie is just one image after another. But because we hold images in our head, we see them as a uninterrupted sequence of events. Muybridge proved this out because he would show people these little images one after another really fast, and people just felt like they were seeing an uninterrupted movie, despite the fact that there weren't the sound, for example, of the horses clopping or running on a track. Okay, so that is Edward Muybridge's The Horse in Motion in 1878, made of albumen print.